Okay, hello everybody. This is a video on timber conversion, which is the next chapter we need to do. And I'm just going to go through these slides here and add notes where they're necessary. And I've also attached a PDF of the slides to your Google Classroom. Okay, so we are on to conversion of timber. But before we talk about what actually conversion means or what it is, we need to talk a little bit about timber felling. Okay, so timber felling is the cutting down of trees. Okay, so felling is cutting down and then they get transported. But before they get transported, they are felled, they are stripped of their branches, and then they're transported as logs up on the back of trucks and lorries. However, there's a little bit more to it than that. There is a key word that you need at this stage, and it is, and I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to put it here now on the slide. It's called clear felling. Now, you will often be asked to explain what clear felling is in your exam in terms of a short question. And clear felling means to cut down all the trees in a particular place. Cut down all trees. Okay, so that's clear felling. Okay, so that's the first thing we need to know. Felling means to cut trees down in the first place. Clear felling means to cut them down all down a particular area, whereas selective felling would mean going into a forest or going into a branch, or not a branch, I'm thinking of banks, going into a forest or an area and just selecting the ones that you want to fell, the ones you want to cut down. Okay, and just back to that, once they are felled, they are then transported. Okay, so clear felling, cut down all trees. Now, what is conversion though? Conversion, and listen to the word conversion, same as convert, which means to change, right? So convert means to change. If you think about it in terms of just as a word, what are we doing? We are converting or changing timber into a more usable form. You know, when you go into the storeroom to get timber, or I bring timber out to you, it is cut in nice, handy, convenient sizes, 2x1s, etc., etc. And we know always what those sizes are. But it doesn't, it doesn't grow like that, as you well know. It grows like over this in the side here, logs. So those logs are transported to a timber yard and a sawmill. And in the sawmill, they get converted. So converted means to cut. Okay, so change or cut. So conversion is cutting logs or boards. Sorry, not or boards. What am I doing? It's a bit early this morning. I'm a bit tired. We try this again. Conversion is cutting timber, logs into boards. Okay, cutting timber logs into boards. And there it is anyway at the bottom of the slide there. The process of converting or cutting logs into boards of a usable timber size. Okay, so that's a definition of conversion. So this whole chapter is about that. How do we change? How do we fix? How do we manage these timber logs? Okay, so in this PowerPoint or in this slide, you see, okay, we have reasons that we need to convert timber. But over here in the photograph, and this is important. Now, I have shown you videos like this before, like within other videos, you would have seen these same pictures in same areas. This is a horizontal bandsaw, which is taking a timber tree trunk and it is passing that saw across the timber in order to cut that into timber of more usable size. Conversion. Now, why do we want to convert timber? Now, this is important. You'll often get asked this in the exam. Well, first of all, it allows the wood to dry faster. If you think of a log, right, when it's cut down in the forest, initially it might have maybe 80% moisture, well, 40 to 80% moisture, depending on the time of year it's cut down, depending on the type of timber it is, depending on where it's cut. But essentially, it's wet timber. And wet timber for us it's not unusable, but it's far more difficult to use because as soon as you cut it and as soon as you start making it into things, it starts to dry and it'll start to warp or it'll bend or it'll twist or it might even cup. And as a result, we have problems then using that timber. So what we do is by converting it into boards of a usable size, it helps us get that wood to dry faster in the first place, but allows us as well to dry it in a controlled way, which is going to be the next chapter. How do we control that drying? So what does it do though as well? It also provides us with wood of a usable size and shape. So wood that is of a usable size and shape. And as I mentioned a while ago, I go into the storeroom, I take out a piece of timber. It is a not random size. It is a size that is more usable. So 20 millimeters by 45. You're used to getting timber that's that size. And that for us is far more usable. Now, last one then, it allows the quality of the timber to be seen. I have no idea, nor does anyone else, what's going on inside in the middle of a tree trunk when you cut it down. You don't know how many knots it might have. You don't know whether there are resin pockets. You don't know are there defects, okay, within that timber. But as soon as you cut it down and you start converting it, remembering that the word converting means cutting into timber of usable size, you can see the quality of that timber. Okay, now just before I move on again, I just want to highlight a few keywords at this stage. Keywords, remember, are words that you need to understand and explain, but more importantly, they're also words that you will use to answer questions in your exam. So the process of converting means cutting. It's a keyword or a key phrase. Logs or boards is a keyword. You'll use that when you're answering questions. And usable timber is also a key phrase that you will use when you're answering questions. Back to the last one, timber felling is important to understand what that is, be able to explain it, be able to use it. So they are felled, felling, and transported, transporting. And clear felling up there that I added myself is a keyword or key phrase to cut down the trees. Conversion itself, of course, is a keyword, and it means cutting timber or logs into boards. Okay. Reasons to convert timber. Horizontal bandsaw is a key phrase. You will use that again in answering your question. So you say that the the sawmill will use a horizontal bandsaw in order to do the conversion. And when we do the conversion, dry faster is a key word. And by the way, keywords aren't words that you don't necessarily know the meaning of. They're words that you will use when answering a question on this topic. Provides wood of usable size and shape is a key phrase as well. Quality is a key word. Allows the quality to be seen. Keyword, key phrase. Okay, now PowerPoint, I'm reading the page directly. Conversion, or at least this chapter, really breaks down into 3 areas, okay? And the 3 areas are, we have through and through sawing, we have quarter sawing, and we have tangential sawing, okay? And what that means is they are the 3 main areas in which we convert timber. In other words, the how we change timber or cut timber. So remember, every time I say the word convert, I mean cut. Okay, now through and through sawing, and you will need to learn that phrase, through and through. It's the most basic and the most simplest way we can cut timber. Okay, and if you look here at the diagram, and I'm just going to zoom in on it for a second, okay, because this is quite important. When you see the word through and through sawing, this is literally what they mean. They mean taking a tree trunk, okay, and cutting it into boards, just like that, okay, that literally go through and through the timber log, right? So we end up getting a board that is quite wide, that is, sorry, 1 second there, that is quite wide, that is also usable because it's quite wide, but also what happens, and this is the bit that you're not aware of quite yet, is that different boards at different positions in that tree log will produce different styles of end grain. Now, end grain is very, very important because the end grain kind of decides how that timber will behave. So at the moment, you're looking at a piece of board or a piece of wood that is cut using through and through. And what you are not noticing, because I haven't highlighted it yet, but I want to highlight it now, is a board that's cut with through and through sawing will produce, change that to be a bit louder, will produce annual rings similar to what I am just showing you here now on that board. Okay, so our end grain or annual rings will be quite pronounced and they will be quite long. Now, the problem with that, okay, is that those boards then will cup, okay? Now, I'll come back to cupping in just a second, but before I do get back into cupping, what I want to just highlight here for a second is the reasons we might do through and through sawing, okay? Or what happens when we do it. First of all, if we're doing through and through sawing, it generates boards that have a low cost. Okay, this is the cheapest method of conversion. Okay, you can't really see it just yet because you haven't seen the other two methods, but in order to do through and through, it's quite simply put the log up on that horizontal bandsaw and let the bandsaw pass through it over and over again, just moving the depth of that bandsaw each time in order to get boards, probably about 25 millimeters thick. So therefore, it's a low cost because it's pretty quick. It's one movement of the log and then the saw just starts passing through at the different depths. Also, there is little waste. If you look at this tree here, if you look at the sides of it, there's very little waste. Okay, there's some waste down along these sections, but this isn't truly waste because we can use that waste in other areas of woodwork. You can use it as in a basic form as garden mulch. Okay, and there are other things that we can use it for. It's very fast and easy. Most people could convert a board if you're given a horizontal bandsaw, or if you had one or had access to one or whatever. Most people can convert timber using this method. It's fast and it's easy. Now, here's the issue, and I said a minute ago I was going to come back to it. Boards are really, really likely to cup. Now, what in the name of God is cup? Okay, going to go in here and do a little bit of diagram drawing for a second. So if I start off with a basic board that is cut through and through. So we already know what this is going to look like. It's going to produce grain that is quite curved, similar to what you're seeing both here and in that other diagram we have as well. Okay, so it's a straight board. Okay, now what happens to that board? Well, after a while, not even after a while, almost instantly, as soon as that board is cut, it starts to dry. Okay, now what happens is while it's drying, the dark rings that I drew on it, those dark annual rings, okay, remember the darker they are, the more likely, or well, not even likely, we know that they are what's called the winter growth. So in the tree, that dark ring, that dark line is what happened or what grew during the winter. And as a result, it's harder and it's denser and the cells are far more packed tightly together. Whereas in here, in this area, in between the annual rings, that's the summer growth, okay? And what's important about that summer growth is that the tree was growing faster, it was getting more sunlight, it was getting moisture, it was getting all the things it wants to grow fast and quick. And as a result, the cells in there are much bigger, much wider, much wetter. Okay, so what actually happens then is as it starts to dry, these pieces, these bits that grew in the summer, okay, this summer growth. Well, remember I told you before, cells are like straws, okay? The cell, okay, so the straw-like cell, let's just try and draw a cell. Actually, no, I won't because that makes it a little bit more confusing. But anyway, those cells, those white cells that contain water, right? So they are drying out and they dry out far quicker than the dense, hard cells here along in the annual rings. And as a result, they begin to shrink. Now, they shrink in this direction. So they start pulling in there, shrinking away, right? The water is escaping out. So this is the summer growth. Actually, almost there. Okay, summer growth, and it is cut and it is shrinking fast, whereas these lines here is the winter growth, the annual rings, the bits we actually count. We're actually counting the winter growth. We don't realize it. And for a tree to grow properly, or for a tree to have these annual rings, 1 year of growth is the winter growth plus the summer growth. Okay, so that's drying out. and it is beginning to contract. And actually, I'm after drawing my arrows in there slightly wrong, because my arrows, oopsie daisies, okay, we'll try to fix that. My arrow should actually show that this, oopsie daisies, there we go to a different color, there we go. So my growth is pulling in this way, and it is, or my drying is pulling in that way. The summer growth is contracting. And what ends up happening, let me go back here to my diagram, is that the board will eventually take on this curved kind of a section. Okay, and the reason it takes on that kind of shape, or that kind, oh sugar, what am I doing? Sorry. But yeah, the reason it takes on that kind of shape is because those cells, as we've said, they've contracted, they've gotten smaller, and now when I go back in and put in my grain, look what's actually happened is the annual rings, and now this isn't strictly a scientific term, but effectively they've kind of tried to straighten out. So the board has pushed up in this direction. Now, if you're not quite getting this, when we get back to school, I'll be going over this quite a bit, talking to you a little bit about it. But what has actually happened now is cupping has occurred, and look, it is what it says in the tin. The board has a cup-like shape. So that's where our cupping comes in. Okay, so the board starts off nice and flat, but it starts to shrink, and the soft summer wood, the larger cells shrink fastest, and as a result, the boards cup. So, and this is what we call cupping. Okay. What notes will I add to this? So the cells of the summer growth shrink. And causes the wood to cup. Okay, so that is unfortunately a huge problem when it comes to through and through sawing. Now, bear in mind what we're at. We're doing conversion, and I've so far told you that there are 3 methods of conversion, and the first one we've gone through there is through and through. Now, benefits of through and through, just to go back over it, it's very cheap, there's very little waste, so that's helpful, it's fast and it's easy, but a negative is the fact that boards are likely to come up. So all of these are advantages, whereas this is a disadvantage. All right, moving on. Next one is quarter sawing. Now, the best piece of information I could give you on this one is that in order to recognize it in an exam, anytime you look at an exam, because there's a few, and even actually this diagram is showing you 2 different ways we can do quarter sawing. There's more than 2 ways. It's quarter sawn when you see, and I'm going to put on a nice big bright red here for this. It's quarter sawn when you see quite clearly that there is a set of boards that are literally at 90 degrees to each other. So let me try highlight that a bit better. Now, okay, so to see those 90 degrees, so quarter sawing, what does it do? Those 90 degrees, those boards make a quarter, or at least it quarters the tree trunk, the log. It quarters that circle, and that's how you recognize it. So if you're asked to identify what is quarter sawing, what is through and through, and what is tangential, which will be our last one, what you're looking to see is it can only be quarter sawing when you see that plus, that X, that line dividing up the log in 2 quarters. Okay, so that's what makes a quarter sawn. Now, if you look at it carefully and look at it there with detail, you'll see that on the left-hand side, after it's quarter sawn, the boards are then just cut all at 90 degrees to each other. So they're put into the piece, they are put into the horizontal bandsaw, and for each cut, the board is rotated at 90 degrees, turned at 90 degrees, a right angle. That's 90 degrees in there for anyone that's not sure. Or what you can do as well is you can turn the board at 45 degrees to the original quarter sawing, and then cut through, generating these boards. Now, if you look at all the boards, they all have a similar end grain type. Okay, now that's important. Keep that in mind now for a minute. Okay, with quarter sawing, the end board type we get or we generate, okay, this picture here, has grain that is, let's have a gander at the old grain generated. It generates this lovely round, that's the wrong color, it should be brown, sorry. Generates this lovely grain, which is almost straight. Okay, there's a tiny curve in it, but it is almost straight. Look at it there. Okay, now if you have been paying attention to the last slide and taken notice, you'll notice, or you'll know, that that means that this board, right down here, this board is not going to cup. It's a far more stable board. It's the type of board you want to use in your project. It's a type of board that will cost more money to buy because it's better quality. Anything that is better quality costs more money. Now, why would we use quarter or radial sawing? That's another name for, by the way, radial sawing. And if you look at it, these are all like radiuses off the center of the trunk. Well, it generates an attractive grain pattern. Okay, this is important. It generates a reasonably nice grain pattern on the surface of the board. So we're talking over here. Okay, so you will see pretty grain, and we're always after pretty grain. We don't want it to ruin our project in terms of we don't want it to make it difficult to make our project, but we want it to look good. But those boards then, not only are they attractive, they are far more stable, and they're more stable because they're not going to cup, okay, because of the way the grain is set up. Not only are they not going to cup, but they're not going to shrink as much. That through and through boards next door, or in the next slide we were talking about, they will not only shrink, but they will shrink quite a bit. Okay, there'll be a certain amount of shrinkage from them and it'll be visible by eye. Whereas with these ones, they don't shrink as much. The boards wear lovely and evenly for flooring. If you want to use these boards for flooring, they're ideal because they're not going to shrink too much. You're not going to end up with gaps. Remember, a floor, when it's put down, okay, has to have expansion gaps at the sides. They're underneath the skirting, between the skirting and the wall. There will be little gaps that you can't see because the skirting covers it. And the purpose of those gaps is for when the board expands and then contracts. So it gets bigger and it gets smaller, and you don't see that floor expanding and contracting. Okay, but because we're going to use, or because you use quarter sawn boards, there is less amount of that happening. So there's less expansion, less contraction, because they're not moving as much, they're not shrinking as much. And also it means that they wear evenly through people walking across the floor because the grain is nice and even. Okay, now the problem though, so far, just to kind of, I suppose, tie this in with the first slide, these are all positives. Okay, positive reasons as to why you would want to use quarter sawing. There is a couple of negatives though, and the negative is that it is more expensive to do. Why is it more expensive? Because the log has to be turned for each cut, and also there's far more waste generated. Okay, if you look at it, not only are you getting these outside edges as waste, but these tiny little boards, they're effectively useless. Okay, they're not really usable, not for furniture making purposes anyway, or anything major like that. All right, so that is quarter sawing. And again, keywords in here, well, the word itself, quarter sawing, is important. Also known as radial sawing. Positives, attractive grain pattern, keyword, key phrase. More stable boards, keyword, key phrase. They shrink less, keyword, key phrase. Boards wearing evenly is important. Labor intensive, important. Expensive and more waste, all important items there. Okay, so they're showing you there on the diagram that this side really is quarter sawing and this is radial sawing. If you use the word quarter sawing in your exam, you're fine. All right, so far, let's go through it again. We've talked about conversion. We said conversion means to change the logs. It's to cut the logs into a timber of a more usable size. Okay, that's the important thing. And then I said a horizontal bandsaw is used, and you can see the horizontal bandsaw inside that picture. I have a few videos I'll be attaching over the next couple of days as well, which will help you understand that a bit better. And then there are reasons there as to why we convert. Through and through sawing then was our first method of conversion, so one of three. Okay, and in through and through sawing, why do we do through and through sawing? It is low cost, little waste, it's fast and easy, the boards are likely to cup, though is the negative. And then we went on to quarter sawing. And what was the difference with quarter sawing? Well, first of all, quite a different grain pattern was generated, and that grain pattern meant a few things. It meant it was attractive. It meant that the boards themselves were more stable, unlikely to change. That's what more stable means. They shrank less, and as a result, they could be used for flooring because they wear evenly. However, I just realized I put in my brackets there wrong. However, the fact that it is labor intensive is a negative here, whereas and also the fact that it's expensive is negative as well, and so is the fact that more waste is generated. Sorry, let me just fix that there. So that's our positives up there, and that's my negatives. Okay, last one. And this is tangential sawing or tangential cutting. Now, before we actually get into the whys and the wherefores and so on and what it looks like, I just want to talk to you a little bit about why it's called tangential. Now, if you look at each of these annual rings, right? So there is an annual ring there, right? And you analyze that annual ring and you look at it. Actually, I'm going to draw that a bit better. Sorry, let me go again. So let's take, for example, that annual ring there, right? And if you look at it, it's just touching off this line. Okay, so there is my line. Now, if you go to your maths class, in your maths class at some point, you will have been told that anytime a line touches a circle at one point only, okay, like that is a tangent. Okay, what is a tangent? A tangent is a line, and where am I going to write it? Tangent. Let me fix that, sorry. Zoom in a bit. A tangent is a line that touches a circle those of you that are doing TG will know this, at one point only. Right, so that's what a tangent is. There it is. Okay. Line that touches a circle at one point only. And look there, they are showing you a sphere with the same setup. It's the same idea. A line. And there's my line. It touches a circle at one point only. Right? Tangent. Okay. Now, so a tangential cut means to touch tangentially to the annual rings, right? What is an annual ring? Okay, an annual ring, which occurs yearly in each tree. Well, an annual ring, effectively, it's a circle, isn't it? So to cut tangentially means to cut at a tangent to the annual rings. So that's what tangential sawing is. Now, what is generated through this, or because of this then, is this set of boards down here. So here we are, tangential sawing. Now let's look at this and analyze it for a moment. So we have one board here, for example. There it is, right? And where is the annual ring? It's touching. Actually, I should have done that in blue. Sorry now, lads. We try to fix this again. Okay, so there's one board. There we go. And it is touching an annual ring, which is in here, at one point only. And if you look at it again, this board is cut touching the annual ring at one point only. So tangential cutting means to generate a cut on the tree that is tangential to the annual rings. Okay, now what happens then, right? And actually, I'm going to go in here and do a little sketch for a minute. You know from what we've done early on in first year when it came to drawing boards. And one of the first things I showed you how to do was how to draw a board and then to add a grain pattern to make it look, I won't say pretty, but to make it look more realistic. Okay. So we would have drawn a board, something like that. And I said to you, right, first thing I want you to do is to shade in that object. And I said always, oh, shade it in brown or yellow or orange, some sort of timber-like color. And then what I said always to you to do was to come along with a brown or a darker color and to add in grains. And I always said here at the end, do these little circles, oops, annual rings. And then I said, right, and then show me a grain pattern. And I said to you, one of the easiest ways to do it is, well, put in a knot, draw around the knot and build up around that. But the other thing that you didn't realize you were drawing when you were drawing it is you were drawing in this flame figure. Now, what's flame figure? Well, you're seeing it there in that picture. See the way the grain cups, actually, I shouldn't use the word cups. It curves like little parabolas up through the timber. And it's only with tangential sawing, or at least it's most often with tangential sawing, that you get this attractive flame figure. So in terms of keywords, what is this called? It's called, oops, wrong one. It's called flame figure. So that's a keyword. So tangential sawing itself is a keyword, key phrase. So we get this attractive flame figure. Now we want that flame figure because it makes timber look nicer and it makes furniture or items made from that timber look better and therefore more expensive. Now, okay, like with quarter sawing, the boards are going to shrink less. Okay, because again, the grain pattern, the end grain, if you look at it, is quite similar to quarter sawing. However, this is another labor intensive method of cutting. Okay, it costs money, therefore. It means that the person that is cutting it has to do far more turning and so on the log. So therefore, if it's labor intensive, it is expensive. Now, what's really important here, though, is the boards don't split as easily as in other methods. Now, what do we mean when we say split? I'm going to draw a diagram. That board that I just drew there, if you draw that, or sorry, if you dry that too quickly, so let's draw it again. So there's my board. Make it a bit longer. Okay, so if I dry that board too quickly, because of this method of cutting, what actually happens is the board will get a thing called end splits, okay, which is where, let's see if I can just, yes, perfect, which is where the timber itself splits along the end grain, okay, so board gets these end splits, but with this will happen in other methods of conversion, okay? But it won't really happen with through and through. All right, so there's our split. So that is an end split. Okay, whereas this is flame figure. Okay, so the boards don't split as easily because of this method of conversion. And then more waste, unfortunately, is produced. So in terms of what is a positive and what is a negative, in this case, flame figure and the board shrinking less is a positive, Put labor intensive and expense. Oh, look, I'm all mixed up. So this is a negative. This is a negative. But the boards don't split easily is a positive. Now, if I was getting you to write this down in class, I'd be getting you to change the order of that list. So we have positives, positive, positive, negative, negative. Okay. So right, where are we? Now, there are questions here at the end of the PowerPoint. Just a quick look through those. You could be asked in your exam, what is felling? And felling is the process of cutting down or harvesting trees. Question 2, describe timber conversion. Well, what is it? Timber conversion is the process of cutting or converting logs into boards of usable timber. That sentence, that phrase literally needs to be learned off. And what's happening there in the picture is conversion. Horizontal bandsaw, that line there that you see going across is the actual blade of the bandsaw. Commonly comes up in questions as well. This one here, name each conversion method. So A is radial or quarter sawn. B is through and through. C is tangential. What will you need to know for your exam? You need to be able to recognize those diagrams and be able to draw them. Some advantages of converting boards through and through. That's why I highlighted the positives and negatives in those lists as we went back along through the page. So low cost is a positive, little waste, and it's fast and easy. Then it says question 5, using a sketch, explain what cupping is. So basically that is the sketch that I drew back on that slide. What actually is it though? When you're using a sketch, you still need annotations. You need notes to help you explain it. So it's a defect. Now we haven't had the word defect earlier on, so I want to highlight that as a key word. Sorry, now I just fixed that. A defect caused by shrinkage. Okay, defect caused by shrinkage. Shrinkage occurs when you're drying timber. And cupping is where a board shrinks and changes shape. So cupping boards, actually, I'm going to highlight that whole sentence because that whole sentence wasn't in the other set of slides and it is very important. Okay, cupping is where a board shrinks and changes shapes. In fact, I'm going to put a star beside that because that is an NB, very important. What else is important here then? What happens then is that the edges of the board move so that they lift away from the heart of the log, right? That's another way of explaining it. Now, what I said was that the cells in the summer part of the tree growth shrink faster than the rest. And as a result, they pull away or they lift away as well there from the heart of the log. Basically, they pull away the grains, sort of try to straighten out, even though that technically isn't scientifically what happens. Another question you could be asked, describe which of the two boards are more likely to split if nails are driven in from the top and explain why this is. Well, we had this a minute ago. First of all, we had what split is or end splits. D is more likely to split because if you drive a nail into that board, it will tend to separate out those annual rings. Whereas up here, your nail isn't going in between the annual rings. It's the in between part that is important. So that's another question you could be asked. All right, so that's the series of slides. Now, in your classroom, I've given you a document so that you can print out those slides. Or ideally, what I want you to do is take notes yourself from what I've just gone through there. Anything I've mentioned or highlighted is something that is important. I want you to take a note on it, and I want you to draw the diagrams. And I will also give you a copy of your textbook pages from that area of the chapter. In the next class, then, I'm going to give you a question on conversion. Okay, so go through it, see what you can do. Remember, felling, cutting down of trees, clear felling, cutting down all the trees. Conversion means changing timber into boards of more usable size. We have 3 methods of conversion, through and through, quarter sawing, tangential sawing, and there are various positives and negatives to that, and you need to know them. Okay, so I've gone through a lot there. Do your best, and I will be coming back to it again anyway. All right, guys.